Today, my wife and I visit Puerto Rico's 10th municipality, a town named after a fish that's actually not a fish. It's an aquatic mammal by the same name. Of course, I'm talking about the beautiful town of Manatí in the north-central region of Puerto Rico. Manatí is bordered by Vega Baja to the east, Morovis and Ciales south, and Florida and Barceloneta to the west. On the north, it has the Atlantic Ocean and a host of beautiful beaches. The town was founded in 1738 by Don Pedro Menéndez Valdés. However, it was Juan Ponce de León himself who identified the Manatí section of the Manatuabón River as the inaugural site for the Crown's gold panning efforts. As we all know, the Spanish sailed to the west looking for golden riches and a shorter route to the East Indies, especially India, China, and Japan. Instead, Columbus went to his grave without ever knowing that he had discovered an entirely new world. Manatí is also bathed on the west by the Rio Grande de Manatí, which separates it from Barceloneta and Florida and adds to the fertility of the Manatí Valley. This river is said to have been known by the Taíno people as Manatuabón. Our first stop was at the beautiful Nuestra Señora de la Candelaria y San Matías church. Built in 1729, 9 years before the actual town of Manatí was founded, the church is an architectural marvel that's still standing in its original spot. In fact, the altar is presently being renovated, and we had the rare opportunity to see some of the original pieces that had been in storage for years. But that wasn't the only thing we saw. There are actually people buried underneath this church. Dozens of them. You can see the engraved tiles in the church floor and around the courtyard. This was a common practice at Catholic churches between the 4th and 19th centuries. Wealthy landowners, important figures, and clergymen were often buried under temples and at small adjacent cemeteries. My wife and I were joking that human beings are weird, complicated creatures. We seek distinction even in the afterlife. I mean, when you go, you can't take it with you, but at least you'll be in good company. Or at least that's what some people think. There's a lot more to this temple than meets the eye. If you look carefully along the south wall, you'll see a small tower at the end that doesn't quite fit with the architecture of the rest of the building. That's because it originally wasn't. It was part of a small fort that eventually was joined to the church. On the south side, there's the tower that became the temple's bell tower. And on the north side is the entrance with an eye-catching inscription in Latin next to the door that reads Omnia Vanita. In Spanish, it means ante la muerte, todo es vanidad. In English, in the presence of death, everything is vanity. A funny inscription to find at a place where the well-to-do would be buried under prime real estate. Taking the temple back to its original state would be a huge endeavor, both physically and monetarily. But great efforts are being made to preserve it as much as possible. Everywhere you look, there's examples of early 18th century Spanish architecture, like its thick brick walls, beam ceilings, wooden louver windows, and marble decorations. To tell you the truth, I've explored 44 towns in Puerto Rico so far, and I've made it a point to visit the Catholic Church. That's because Puerto Rico's history is intricately related to Spanish traditions, and the Catholic faith is one of the most important. Besides, there are people that go around the world visiting old temples, and Puerto Rico has a huge and varied selection. That said, I had never seen anything quite like this one. Oh, and one last thing. The altar points east like in Spanish tradition. Just west of Nuestra Señora de la Candelaria y San Matías church, you have Manatí's main public square, which has changed names several times throughout its history. It was originally known as Plaza de la Candelaria, later on as Plaza de la Abolición. Finally, in November 1916, the Municipal Assembly changed its name to Plaza Luis Muñoz Rivera, the island's second resident commissioner, who we discussed during our Barranquitas video. In Puerto Rico, we have a saying, para los gustos se hicieron los colores, which in the King's English would be something like to each his own. That said, I found this square to be busy, or more accurately, overbuilt. Let's break it down. On the north side, there are 4 statues representing the 3 ethnicities that gave way to Puerto Rican society: Europeans, Africans, and Taíno natives. The 4th is, of course, the Puerto Rican Criollo. Just west of the statues, there's a beautiful tile mural honoring Luis Muñoz Rivera by Carolina artist Cecila Orta. Each piece of tile is about 1/4 inch square, so just putting together the puzzle must have taken months of hard work. On the southeast, southwest, and northwest corners of the square, there are 3 fountains. None of them were working. Now, you know how I feel about fountains. Running water is one of the most soothing sounds you can have. It just adds liveliness to a place. And of course, fountains that are not working do the opposite. There's also a parking area underneath the plaza with space for 200 vehicles. Then, there's the central area. It's just too busy. Too much stuff. There are 28 planters in the center area with 14 benches. I imagine that there were supposed to be trees in those planters providing shade for the people sitting in the benches. But the fact is that there aren't any trees. Consequently, no one sits in the benches. Along the edge of the square, you have the same situation. Benches and boxes with very few trees and even less patrons. At the northwest center, there's a gazebo-shaped structure that serves as a bandstand. It's no accident that the most spectacular squares in Puerto Rico also have the most trees. That's because people can actually enjoy them. Sadly, often architects and engineers tend to overbuild. I guess there's no money in trees. Further west from the Luis Muñoz Rivera Square, there are 2 additional buildings that are worth taking a look at. On the west end of the square, you have the Joaquín Rosa Gómez Art Center, a beautiful multi-use building that was originally built in 1925 to serve as the town's farmers market. Joaquín Rosa Gómez served as a member of the Puerto Rican Senate from 1953 to 1956. He was also a delegate to the 1952 Constitutional Assembly, which drafted Puerto Rico's Constitution. He also served as mayor of Manatí for 4 terms. West of the Joaquín Rosa Gómez Art Center, across Valdoriotti Street, you have what used to be José de Diego School. José de Diego was a politician born in the neighboring town of Aguadilla. He lived between 1866 and 1918 and is recognized as the father of the Puerto Rican independence movement. But that's hardly why this building is important. Upon further digging, I discovered that this used to be La Casa del Rey during colonial times. And what's that, you might ask? Well, in the King's English, that would be the King's House, the place representing the Spanish crown. In other words, modern-day City Hall. That was the missing piece. The church on the east, the square in the middle, and La Casa del Rey on the west end. And speaking of City Hall, today's City Hall is a huge building on the north side of the square. While I was flying the drone, my wife Zory went asking for information about Manatí, and they were quite friendly and helpful. Across from City Hall, on the corner of Quiñones and Patriota Pozo streets, stand the ruins of the Brunet-Calaf residence. This was one of the most impressive of the 19th century townhouses of Manatí. The building evidences a diversity of stylistic tendencies which were common to Manatí's architectural history between 1850 and 1910. To this day, The building evokes a certain sense of mystery. It often serves as a backdrop for photo shoots, weddings, quinceañeros, the Puerto Rican equivalent of a Sweet 16, cultural events, and tourist excursions. You can tell the age of the ruins by observing its 4 feet thick brick walls. They just don't build them like that anymore. A couple of steps east along Quiñones Street, you'll find the Manatí Tourism Office. There we met with Mrs. Maria Mojica, who was more than eager to answer all of our questions. I had come in contact with the personnel from the Manatí Tourism Office about a year ago at a convention in San Juan, and they struck me as friendly, outgoing people. And their dedication shows. They have an entire office promoting tourism in Manatí, as opposed to the lonely employee sitting at a dusty desk that you see in other municipalities. I had already done my due diligence, so I was hardly as needy as other visitors, but Mrs. Mojica was still helpful, friendly, knowledgeable, and pointed us in the right direction. All in all, we spent over an hour at the Manatí Tourism Office. From there, we walked a few blocks north along Patriota Pozo Street to the Plaza de la Historia. That would be History Plaza in the King's English. Plaza de la Historia is located on the corner of Patriota Pozo Street and State Road 6682. It's a beautiful black marble monument that presents a synthesized version of the history of Manatí as written by Manatí historian Dr. Carmelo Rosario Natal. There was one more place to visit before leaving the historic center of Manatí. I'm not one for visiting cemeteries, but Maria Mojica got me curious when she said that the who's who of Manatí society is buried there. I guess the company you keep does matter in the afterlife. I'm not going to start naming names because I'm sure to leave someone out. But believe me, la creme de la creme were all there. After a short lunch, we headed for the coast. After spending so much time at the historic center of town, you tend to forget that Manatí is actually a coastal town. Our first stop would have been at Hacienda La Esperanza, a 19th century sugarcane plantation restored by the Puerto Rico Conservation Trust that's a wonderful experience in itself. However, Puerto Rico Conservation Trust properties can only be visited by appointment, and that can be a process in itself. Even so, we tried, but discovered that the property is undergoing an improvement project and it will be closed for the month of August. My wife and I had visited before, but I certainly would have loved to show it to you. Oh well. A little further down the road, there's a beach that actually belongs to the Hacienda La Esperanza property, but can be visited without reservations. It's called Playa La Esperanza, and getting there can be quite a trek. The footage you're watching wasn't recorded for this video. It was recorded when I updated my book Puerto Rico Beach by Beach several months ago. We walked about a mile along a coastal forest to reach a beach that's among the nicest I've visited in all Puerto Rico. However, be advised that Playa La Esperanza is a wild beach. That means that it's exactly as God made it. No showers, no lockers, no concession areas, and most importantly, no lifeguards. You're 100% on your own. That said, drowning at La Esperanza is hard work. The whole thing is like a giant pool. Of course, that's if you stay off the rocks. Beyond the rocks, it's a different ball game. Walking east of Playa La Esperanza, there are 5 more beaches: Playa Tómbolo, Playa Las Marías, Playa Boquilla, Playa Las Golondrinas, and La Poza de las Mujeres. All of them wild beaches and all dangerous. Northeast of Hacienda La Esperanza, there are 2 more beautiful beaches, but there's no direct road to take you there. You'll have to return to State Road number 2 and take a different road there. The first is Mar Chiquita, a beautiful cove with a very narrow mouth that's among the nicest and safest beaches in the North Coast. That said, as in the case of Playa La Esperanza, Mar Chiquita is safe as long as you stay away from the rocks and the mouth of the cove. The second beach, just a couple of miles east of Mar Chiquita, is Playa Los Tubos. Los Tubos is a hybrid between a wild beach and a public beach. Public beaches, also known in Puerto Rico as balnearios, have all the facilities. Most importantly, they have lifeguards. Well, in the case of Los Tubos, the government has added parking, gazebos, showers, and playground areas. But to be honest, I was there just a couple of weeks ago and I didn't see a single lifeguard. And here's a word of advice. Los Tubos is favored by scuba divers because it gets real deep real quick. So be careful. There's just one more point of interest in the area, but it was off limits when I did my last video of the town of Vega Baja. It's the Tortuguero Lagoon that sits between Manatí and the neighboring town of Vega Baja. Tortuguero Lagoon has been infested with caimans since the early 1970s. You see, Puerto Ricans have been quite stupid in taking care of the island. And I'm a Puerto Rican, so this is something that I can attest to. During the last 50 years, unscrupulous parties have smuggled all sorts of exotic animals into the island, including boa constrictors, reticulated pythons, ball pythons, caimans, rhesus macaque monkeys, mongooses, large green iguanas, and even piranhas. In the case of caimans, they were actually brought in by pet shops, if you can believe it. And of course, when the animals became unmanageable, people just threw them in the wild. And guess what? Manatí, as well as other adjacent towns, are in a region called the Karst, that's commonly wet and ridden with caves. Not a good combination with all those invading species. So at this point, the only safe way to see Tortuguero Lagoon is from the air. It was getting late, so we decided to head back to San Juan. And talking about San Juan, if you're planning to visit the old city, save yourself the hassle of traditional city tours. They're expensive and you'll be herded along with people that won't necessarily share your interests. Instead, order the Old San Juan Walking Tour. It's packed with useful information about all the main attractions, as well as every GPS coordinate and 2 hours of exclusive online video. That way, you'll be able to visit before you visit and hit the ground running when you arrive in the old city. See you next time.